It was a bright Saturday morning, the kind that usually promised laughter, sunlight, and the comforting hum of sprinklers echoing across Maplewood Drive. Birds sang on the oak trees lining the neat suburban street, and kids' laughter echoed in the distance. For once, the neighborhood seemed peaceful, at least until my son, Ethan, rolled out his brand-new mountain bike for the first time. He had just turned 12 the day before. His birthday party was simple: pizza, chocolate cake, a few friends, and the moment that had made his eyes shine brighter than any candle on that cake, the shiny blue Trek mountain bike we'd saved up for months to buy. It was his dream gift. The kind of bike that made him feel grown-up, unstoppable, like he could ride to the moon and back if he wanted. Ethan had barely slept that night. By 7 a.m., he was already in his sneakers, helmet strapped tight, ready to take his new bike around the block for its first ride. I watched him from the porch, a coffee mug in hand, smiling at his excitement. The way his face glowed with joy reminded me why every overtime I'd worked had been worth it. But the peace didn't last long. Because in our neighborhood, there was one constant: Karen. Karen was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, the kind of woman who believed every mailbox should be painted the same shade of beige and that no one's trash bins should touch the curb before exactly 6 p.m. She lived 3 houses down and somehow knew everything about everyone: who didn't mow their lawn that week, who parked slightly too close to the sidewalk, and who dared to use a none-approved garden gnome. If there was a rulebook for suburban tyranny, Karen had written it. Ethan hadn't even made it halfway down the street before I heard the first shout. "Hey! You there! Stop right now!" Karen's voice carried across the cul-de-sac like a siren. My stomach tightened. Ethan slowed his bike, confused, one sneaker dragging lightly against the asphalt. He looked back at her, probably wondering what he'd done wrong. Karen marched down her driveway like a general heading into battle, phone in hand, hair perfectly sprayed into submission, her expression twisted with the righteousness of someone convinced they were saving civilization itself. "That's not your bike," she barked, pointing at Ethan. "I know that bike. It belongs to the Andersons' boy. You'd better put that down before I call the police." I was frozen for a second, completely stunned. My mind scrambled to make sense of her words. She thought my son stole his own bike? Ethan blinked at her, speechless. This is my bike," he said, his voice small but steady. "Don't lie to me." Karen snapped. "I saw that exact model outside the Andersons' garage yesterday. I've lived here long enough to know who owns what. You're new, aren't you? I told the HOA we should vet people better before they move in." The venom in her words stung. We had moved in just 3 months earlier, hoping for a quieter neighborhood, a place where Ethan could grow up safe. But apparently, we'd walked straight into a suburban minefield run by someone who had appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner. I set my coffee cup down on the porch railing and hurried down the steps. "Excuse me, Karen," I said as evenly as I could. "That's my son, and that's his bike. We bought it yesterday for his birthday." Karen turned her glare on me, her lips curling in disbelief. "Oh really? Convenient story," she said. "You expect me to believe that? People like you think you can just come into this neighborhood and take whatever you want." My jaw tightened. "People like you?" The way she said it wasn't about newcomers, it was about class, about prejudice, about control. Ethan's face flushed red. He looked like he wanted to disappear. I said, my patience thinning. "I can show you the receipt right now. The bike shop's just 5 miles away. You're making a big mistake." But Karen wasn't listening. She was already dialing. "Good. The police will sort this out." I could hear her giving the dispatcher our address, claiming she'd caught a young boy in the act of stealing property. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to scream, to shake her out of her delusion, but all I could do was wrap an arm around my son and tell him it would be okay. Only it wasn't okay, not when neighbors started peeking through curtains, not when the distant wail of a siren started to echo closer. By the time the police cruiser turned the corner, Karen stood proudly with her arms crossed, as if she'd just saved the entire neighborhood from a crime wave. The officer stepped out, calm but cautious, one hand resting near his belt. Karen wasted no time. "That's him," she shouted, pointing at Ethan. "That's the boy who stole the bike." The officer looked at my son, then at me, confusion flickering across his face. "Sir," he said carefully, "I'll need to hear both sides." Karen scoffed. "Both sides? What's there to hear? He's literally on the stolen bike." I took a deep breath. "Officer, I have the receipt for the bike inside. We bought it from Pedal Power yesterday afternoon, serial number and everything. It was Ethan's birthday gift." For the first time, Karen hesitated, her lips twitching. But she wasn't ready to back down. "You probably made that up," she muttered. The officer raised a brow. I'll handle this." As I went inside to grab the paperwork, I could still hear Karen muttering about keeping the neighborhood safe. My hands were shaking as I pulled the crumpled receipt from the kitchen drawer. When I came back out, the officer took it, glanced at the date, the serial number, and then compared it to the one etched under the bike's frame. His expression softened immediately. "This matches," he said, turning to Karen. "The bike's registered to them. It's not stolen." The color drained from Karen's face, but she quickly tried to recover. "Well, how was I supposed to know? I was just doing my duty as an HOA member." The officer gave her a long, unimpressed look. You called in a false theft report on a minor. That's a serious misuse of emergency services." Karen's eyes widened. "Wait, you can't be serious." But the officer was already radioing it in. Ethan stood silently beside me, clutching the handlebars of his bike. The birthday joy that had once shone on his face was gone, replaced by a kind of quiet hurt that no child should ever feel. As the officer began taking statements, Karen's voice cracked, her confidence crumbling for the first time. And as the morning sun climbed higher, our quiet street bore witness to a scene no one expected. The self-appointed queen of the HOA, realizing her crown was about to fall. The sound of the police radio crackling still echoed in the air, mingling with the awkward silence that had swallowed Maplewood Drive. A few neighbors had stepped out of their homes, pretending to check their mail or water their lawns, but everyone's eyes were fixed on the same scene. Karen, red-faced and defiant, standing beside the police cruiser, and Ethan, my son, quietly clutching the handlebars of the very bike she claimed was stolen. The officer had already confirmed the serial number, but Karen wasn't ready to admit defeat. Her voice, shrill and desperate, cut through the calm morning air. "There has to be a mistake. I saw that bike before. The Anderson kid had one just like it." The officer, a middle-aged man with calm blue eyes, sighed. Having a similar model doesn't make it stolen. This bike matches the receipt and registration the father provided. It's legally theirs." Karen's eyes darted around, searching for someone to agree with her, but the other neighbors looked away. No one wanted to be associated with her meltdown, at least not publicly. But I could see a few smirks of satisfaction from those who'd probably been on the receiving end of her self-righteous HOA crusades before. Ethan stood silently by my side. His shoulders were tense, his small hands gripping the handlebars as if letting go would mean losing everything he'd been excited about. He wasn't crying anymore, but his eyes were dull, like someone who'd just learned that adults could be cruel for no reason. I crouched beside him, whispering, "Hey, buddy. You did nothing wrong, okay? None of this is your fault." He nodded slowly but didn't say anything. The joy of his first bike ride was gone. Karen crossed her arms and scoffed. "So what, I'm the bad guy now. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." The officer turned toward her, his tone now firmer. Filing a false police report is not protecting anyone. You accused a 12-year-old of theft without evidence. You wasted police resources, embarrassed an innocent family, and frightened a child. That's not how responsible citizens behave." Her face twitched, but she still didn't back down. "You can't arrest me for trying to do the right thing." The officer glanced at his partner, who had just arrived, a younger female officer who seemed to take in the entire situation at a glance. "Actually," she said, You can be cited or detained for misuse of emergency services, especially when it involves a minor. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time since I'd moved into Maplewood, she looked genuinely lost. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to get back on his bike, wanting to ride away, but I stopped him gently. "Let's wait, son," I said quietly. "Let's just finish this first." Karen's husband, Greg, came jogging out of their house at that moment, still in his slippers and robe, clearly having been woken by the commotion. "Karen, what the hell is going on?" he asked, his face pale as he saw the two officers and the crowd. Karen immediately turned to him. "Greg, I caught this boy stealing a bike. But now everyone's acting like I'm the villain." Greg's eyes moved from her to Ethan, then to me, and finally to the police officers. "Karen," he said slowly, "that's the kid from down the street. We were just at their house yesterday, remember? You complimented their yard." The silence that followed was heavy. Karen blinked, confusion clouding her expression before the realization sank in. Her voice faltered. I didn't realize." Greg sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You never realize. You just assume." The female officer stepped forward. I'm going to need to see some ID, please." Karen turned pale. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," the officer replied. "You made a false claim that led to an unnecessary emergency response. The law takes that seriously, especially when minors are involved." Karen's lips quivered. "I didn't mean to cause any harm," she said, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. The male officer interjected, "Intent doesn't erase impact." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Ethan looked up at me. "Dad, is she going to jail?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. The truth was, I didn't know. But part of me thought maybe a few hours in custody would finally teach her humility. The younger officer crouched to Ethan's level. "Hey, buddy. You're not in trouble, okay? You did nothing wrong. You have a really nice bike, happy late birthday." She smiled warmly. Ethan managed a small nod, and for the first time since the chaos started, I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. Then Karen's voice broke through again, smaller and shakier this time. "I just thought I was helping. This neighborhood's gone downhill ever since." "Ever since what?" I cut in sharply. "Ever since families like mine moved in." She froze. I hadn't meant to let my anger show, but it spilled out anyway. "You humiliated my son. You made him feel like a criminal on his birthday. You called the cops instead of asking a simple question." Karen's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. The officer nodded. "Sir, I understand your frustration. We'll make sure this is handled properly." As they led Karen toward the cruiser for questioning, whispers rippled through the neighborhood. A few neighbors even stepped closer, offering quiet apologies or awkward smiles, as if to say we're not all like her. One of them, Mrs. Rivera from across the street, walked over and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "I'm so sorry you and your boy had to go through that," she said. "Karen's always been like this. Maybe this will finally wake her up." I thanked her, though the words felt hollow. Nothing could undo the humiliation Ethan had faced that morning. When the police finally drove off, with Karen sitting in the backseat, her eyes wide and stunned, I turned to Ethan. "You okay, champ?" He shrugged, forcing a weak smile. "Can we just go home?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Let's go home." As we walked back toward our house, I could feel the neighbors' eyes still on us, some sympathetic, some curious, and a few simply stunned that the all-powerful HOA Karen had finally been taken down. But to me, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Inside, Ethan parked his bike by the porch and went straight to his room. I sat down on the couch, my hands trembling slightly. It wasn't just about Karen, it was about what she represented, the way some people think authority gives them the right to judge and control others. That night, after things had quieted down, I peeked into Ethan's room. He was asleep, his bike helmet still on his desk beside a small photo from his birthday. I smiled faintly, whispering, "Next weekend, we'll ride together. No one's stopping us again." But as I turned off the light, I knew this story wasn't over. Karen wouldn't just disappear quietly. People like her rarely do. Somewhere down the street, in the house with the perfect lawn and matching shutters, Karen was probably already planning her comeback. And when she did, she'd find out the hard way that this time, the neighborhood wasn't on her side anymore. By Monday morning, the story had spread through the entire neighborhood like wildfire. No one had to say Karen's name, everyone already knew. The whispers started in the group chat, then on the HOA message board, and finally spilled into the coffee shop at the corner of Maplewood Plaza. "Did you hear what happened on Maplewood Drive? Karen called the cops on a 12-year-old kid. I heard it was over a birthday bike." Everywhere I went, I caught snippets of the story, told in hushed tones and half smiles. Some exaggerated it, others softened it, but the point was always the same: the queen of the HOA had finally crossed the line. For the first time since moving to Maplewood, people started waving at me. Strangers who used to ignore us now smiled politely or offered sympathetic nods. It was strange, almost uncomfortable. We hadn't asked for attention, we just wanted peace. But this incident had made us the accidental center of the neighborhood's moral compass. Ethan, however, wasn't feeling any of that. He hadn't touched his bike since that morning. It sat quietly against the porch, its blue paint gleaming in the sun, waiting for him. Every time I asked if he wanted to ride, he'd just shake his head. "I don't want to," he'd mutter, eyes downcast. When I pressed, he finally admitted, "What if someone else thinks I stole it too?" That broke my heart more than anything. I tried explaining that not everyone was like Karen, but for a 12-year-old who'd been humiliated in front of his whole neighborhood, words didn't mean much. Meanwhile, Karen's reputation was crumbling. The HOA president, Mr. Lambert, had called for an emergency meeting after multiple neighbors filed complaints about her abuse of authority. Apparently, she had been the source of a dozen unnecessary HOA notices, warnings about lawn length, mailbox height, even unauthorized decorations. When Wednesday rolled around, curiosity got the better of me. I didn't plan on attending the HOA meeting, but Mrs. Rivera stopped by and convinced me otherwise. "You should be there," she said. "She owes you and your boy an apology." So that evening, I found myself sitting in the community center's beige folding chair, surrounded by a dozen residents whispering behind their hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Karen sat near the front, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, no longer the confident neighborhood enforcer, but a woman on the defensive. The HOA president cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We're here to address several concerns regarding a recent incident involving one of our residents, Mrs. Karen Whitmore." All eyes turned to her. She forced a tight smile and stood, smoothing her skirt. "First of all," she began, "I want to make it clear that I was only acting in the best interest of this community. We've had thefts before, porch pirates, bikes gone missing, and I thought I was preventing another one. It was a misunderstanding, that's all." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Rivera raised her hand. "A misunderstanding? You called the police on a 12-year-old boy. You accused him publicly, without proof, and terrified him in front of everyone." Karen's face flushed. "I didn't mean to scare him. But how was I supposed to know? His bike looked like any other store-bought bike," Mrs. Rivera interrupted sharply. "You didn't ask. You accused." The room fell silent again. Karen's voice grew shaky. "I admit I might have overreacted. But everyone's acting like I'm a criminal." The officer said you filed a false report," someone from the back called out. Laughter broke out briefly, though it was more nervous than cruel. Karen's eyes flicked toward me. "And you," she said, her voice tightening. "You've been telling everyone I'm a racist and a liar." I leaned back in my chair, steadying my tone. "I haven't said a word, Karen. You did that all on your own." Her husband, Greg, who sat 2 seats away, sighed heavily. "Karen, maybe it's time to stop defending yourself and just apologize. She looked at him as if betrayed. Greg, whose side are you on? The side of common sense, he replied softly. The HOA president cleared his throat again. Mrs. Whitmore, we've received multiple complaints about your behavior, not just from this incident, but from several others over the past year. This latest event, involving the police and a minor, has forced us to re-evaluate your position on the HOA board. Karen's head snapped up. My position? Yes, he said firmly. Effective immediately, you're being suspended from all HOA activities until further notice. You will no longer have authority to issue notices, make complaints on behalf of the board, or represent the community in any official capacity. A low buzz of whispers filled the room. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't do that. I've been running this association for 7 years. And maybe that's the problem, the president said. It's time the neighborhood breathed again. Karen stood there, trembling, her face red with fury and humiliation. You're all ungrateful, she hissed. I kept this place from falling apart. Without me, this neighborhood will turn into chaos. But no one responded. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the sound echoed through the hall. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Mrs. Rivera turned to me and said softly, Well, that's that. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess so. As the meeting dispersed, a few neighbors came up to me, offering quiet words of support. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner, others promised to check in on Ethan. For the first time since moving in, I felt something close to community, a fragile sense of belonging that had been missing before. When I got home, Ethan was sitting on the couch, watching TV. How was the meeting? He asked, glancing up. She's not in charge anymore, I told him. He raised an eyebrow. Really? Really? Looks like justice caught up. He thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. Good. There was a pause, then he added, Can we go for a ride tomorrow? I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Yeah, buddy. We can. The next morning, as the sun rose over Maplewood Drive, Ethan finally climbed back on his bike. He rode slow at first, cautious, glancing around as if half expecting another confrontation. But as the wind caught his hair and the morning light hit his face, that old joy returned. Karen's house blinds were shut tight. Her driveway, once pristine and decorated with HOA-approved flowers, now looked strangely lifeless. For the first time, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to everyone, not just her. 2 weeks had passed since the HOA meeting, and Maplewood Drive had settled into an uneasy calm. The summer heat was back, the kids were out playing again, and for the first time, the streets sounded alive instead of patrolled. Karen's name, though, was still whispered like a ghost that haunted the block. Her arrest had been brief but real. After the HOA meeting, the police department completed its report and charged her with filing a false police report and misuse of emergency services, a misdemeanor, but one that carried a heavy fine and community service hours. For someone like Karen, whose pride was built on control and status, that was worse than jail. I didn't rejoice when I heard. Honestly, I felt tired. I wasn't seeking revenge. I just wanted peace. Still, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that what happened to Ethan had been taken seriously, that someone like her couldn't just bully people without consequences. Ethan had started riding again. Every morning before breakfast, he'd do a few loops around the block. The first few days, he was cautious, looking both ways, making sure no one was watching. But by the fourth morning, he was smiling again, racing down the street with wind in his hair, his laughter echoing just like it used to. Watching him from the porch, I finally felt like we'd reclaimed something Karen had tried to take from us, our sense of safety. That afternoon, while Ethan was at a friend's house, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, I froze. Karen stood there. Her posture was different, shoulders slumped, hands clasped nervously. She wasn't the towering, sharp-tongued HOA enforcer anymore. She looked human. "Can I talk to you?" she asked quietly. For a moment, I considered closing the door. but then I nodded. Sure. She stepped onto the porch, glancing at the bike parked beside the railing. Her eyes softened. It really is a beautiful bike, she murmured. Yeah, I said evenly. My son loves it. She looked down, shame flickering across her face. I came to say I'm sorry, she said finally. To you, and to Ethan. I was wrong. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to let her twist in that silence, to feel the same humiliation she'd made us feel, but another part of me saw something different, regret. Real, painful regret. I wasn't thinking, she continued. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I let my assumptions take over. I saw what I wanted to see instead of what was true. The police fine, the HOA suspension, honestly, I deserved them. I'd been so obsessed with rules, with appearances, that I forgot about people. I studied her for a moment. You hurt my son, I said quietly. You embarrassed him in front of everyone. He was scared to ride his bike for days. Her voice broke. I know. And that's what I regret the most. If you'll let me, I'd like to apologize to him in person. Ethan came home an hour later, and I told him Karen wanted to talk. His first reaction was a sharp no. But when I explained that she seemed genuinely sorry, he hesitated, then nodded. When Karen saw him, she smiled nervously. Hi, Ethan. He didn't reply. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I made a mistake. I thought you took something that wasn't yours, and that was wrong. You didn't deserve that. You're a good kid, and I hope someday you'll forgive me. Ethan stared at her for a moment, then said quietly, You made me feel like I was bad, and I didn't do anything. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know. And that's something I'll have to live with. I just hope I can make it right. After a long pause, Ethan finally nodded. Okay, he said. Just, don't do it to anyone else. Karen smiled faintly. I won't. She turned to leave, but before she reached the sidewalk, Ethan said, Hey, Mrs. Whitmore. She looked back. My birthday's next month, he said with a grin. You can come if you want. Karen's eyes widened in surprise. Then, for the first time, she smiled, a real, human smile. Thank you, Ethan. That means a lot. When she left, the air felt lighter. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan leaned against my shoulder. Dad, do you think people like her can change? I thought about that for a while. I think some can, I said. When life forces them to see what they've become. He nodded thoughtfully. I hope she does. I don't want anyone else to feel like that. The weeks that followed were surprisingly calm. Karen started keeping to herself. No more angry HOA emails, no surprise warnings on doors, no confrontations about non-regulation plants. Once, I even saw her picking up trash along the park trail as part of her community service. She waved when she saw me. I waved back. One Saturday morning, as Ethan and I rode bikes together down the same street where it had all started, I realized something profound. The neighborhood hadn't just changed her, it had changed us too. We'd learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean fighting, it can mean staying calm, holding your ground, and letting truth do the work for you. And that forgiveness, while not always easy, is sometimes the final act of strength. When we reached the corner, Ethan stopped and pointed toward Karen's house. Dad, look. In her front yard stood a small sign that read, Kindness keeps communities safe. I smiled. Maybe it was her way of making peace with the past. Ethan grinned. Guess she learned her lesson. Yeah, I said. And so did we. As we pedaled home, the sun glinted off his blue bike, bright and free, no longer a symbol of conflict, but of growth, courage, and a hard-won peace. And somewhere behind us, Karen watched from her porch, a quiet smile on her face, perhaps realizing that sometimes redemption doesn't come from control, but from humility. For the first time, Maplewood Drive truly felt like home.